We are here in the real presence of Jesus in the Holy Eucharist, in the monstrance. He's truly here. This is not a symbol. So Lord, with your permission, allow me to speak in your presence and tell another story about the Holy Eucharist. How could a little piece of paper weigh more than a side of beef? Hi everyone, this is Father Rocky in the Chapel of the Nativity at Relevant Radio in Green Bay, Wisconsin, with another story about the Holy Eucharist in our Eucharistic Encounter series as we all prepare for the National Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis in 2024. And the name of the story is The Value of a Mass. And it takes place in a poor suburb of Paris in the mid-1800s. And one day this little old lady is walking down the cobblestone street with her cane in her hand, and you can see she's old and she's got arthritis, and you can see the poor thing is really, really poor. And she's hungry. And she walks into a butcher shop. The butcher is behind the counter, and at the end of the counter is his old friend who was a captain in the war. And the little old lady looks up and she said, "Could you give me some meat so I could have something to eat?" She was begging. Well, the butcher was respectful, but he said to the woman, "Well, if I give you some meat so you've got something to eat, what are you going to give me?" And she was so sorry because she had no money. She felt humbled and embarrassed. But then she got an idea. She said, "Well, I could go hear a mass for you." Well, he wasn't much of a believer, but he was respectful and he was kind. And he said, "Okay, ma'am, you go hear a mass for me and come back and we'll see what that's worth." So she walks out the door and walks down the block. And at the end of the block, there's a Catholic church. And she got in there and she knelt down in a kneeler and she heard a mass for the butcher. That's how they used to say it, hear a mass. And at the end of the mass, she prayed. And then she walked back to the butcher shop an hour or two later and opened the door. And they were surprised to see her. And she said, "I just heard a mass for you. So would you give me some meat so I could have something to eat?" And the butcher said, "Well, okay, let's see how much that is worth." And he took a piece of paper and he wrote down, "She heard one mass for me." And he took that piece of paper off the pad and put it on the scale that they use for weighing meat. And little by little, the scale went down to the bottom. And he said, "Okay, well, let's see what that's worth." And he walked to the refrigerator and grabbed a pretty generous portion of ground beef, put it on the scale, and it didn't move. And he fooled around with the weights, and it still didn't move. That little paper with a mass on it weighed more than that pound of ground beef. So then he went back to the cupboard, and he got a ham, a honey-baked ham, a 10-pound honey-baked ham. And he put that on the scale, and the scale didn't move. He was astounded, and so was the captain. So finally, he went back to the freezer. He brought out a half side of beef. I don't know how he got it on the scale, but he got it on the scale, and it still didn't move. What's the moral of the story? That one mass, one single mass, is more valuable than anything because it's an infinite amount of grace. I tell this charming story to you, the children love it, to make the point. If you can get to Mass frequently, it's well worth it to be with Jesus. If you have a need, if you have an intention, if you need a miracle, if you've got a conundrum, bring it to Jesus in the Holy Eucharist. Well, I sure hope to see you next year at the National Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis. Relevant Radio will be there, and we'll be broadcasting the Family Rosary across America every single evening at the beginning of the event.